Okay, so let's go for the. Is it okay? So let's go for the last lecture of the day. I think you are fed up to see me every time here on the. But it's not finished. You will see me more and more and more. So I will try to make it short that time. Promise. So I will speak about high temperature deformation and creep. I know that here a lot of people are interested in superalloys. Typically, what happens is turbine blade, where you have this superalloy which try to sustain the deformation. But I wanted to show you something else first. We'll go back to superalloys later on. First, I want to show you another material that I love, which is ice. Ice is like this. So this is a real ice, single crystal. So single crystal that we were able to grow in the fridge. So you go in your fridge, you need to cover, of course, because it's very cold. It's minus 20. At minus 20, you make your single crystal grow. You machine your single crystal. You are able to identify the C-axis, which is an hexagonal structure. So you do your best to have your C-axis toward the axis of your cylinder that you machined, like this. And then you put it in a device where you can apply a weight like this in order to apply a torsion. And we will see how the creep behavior occurs in this ice single crystal in torsion. Okay? Torsion like that. Do you get it? And why this is a high temperature? What do you think this is high temperature? Because it's minus 20, I told you it's very cold. So why this is high temperature? It's very close to the melting temperature, yes, indeed. It's minus 20 compared to 0, so it's very, very close to high temperature. So it's really a high temperature deformation mechanism here. So it's single crystal, C-axis, and torsion, like that. So we'll see, and it's too bad that Sundar Raman is not here, because I will show him now some boundaries. Twist boundaries, typically. So here, this is what we found experimentally. So experimentally, when you do that, so you need to wait weeks. This is time in seconds, so it's not in 1 hour or 2 hours. It's a very slow process. The ice is creeping very slowly. So this is the shear, torsion shear, and this is the time. So you can see that you have some incubation time, and then you have a power law like that, and then you have a kind of constant strain rate, more or less. But if you want to look at the gamma dot like this, if you take the derivative of the curve, you can see that it's a low derivative and then something which is increasing. So it's not a constant strain rate, it's always increasing. And we say that gamma dot is about to be proportional to the square of the stress. So this is typically what people found experimentally. Okay, this is experiment. The question is, why is it like that? Why is it evolving with such a law for ice in shear, pure shear? So we did some DD modeling. So this is a PhD study I was supervising. This was defined 10 years ago, 2007. So this is how it looks like. You have your circle. This is your domain. You can see it here, the white cylinder. In this domain, you will put some screw dislocation, because screw dislocation are the only one that could accommodate rotation, a twist. A twist is made of screw lines. You can see that here are all my sources. So I put S like source. These are the same family source, same family source, same family source. And when you apply your torque, so your momentum to the specimen, they emit dislocations toward the center like that. So I have a first question for you that should appear. Is it? Yes. Yeah, do you think those two dislocations, the green one here, do they repel or do they attract? And why? So think about it. It's a torsion, so we are shearing with the arrow here. According to that, this is the applied stress. We applied this kind of stress. I can write down the equation, but you all know from strength of materials that tau is equal to the torsion momentum times the radius over the quadratic moduli. Okay. So this is the shear stress, which is applied all around the specimen. So you apply a shear like that. Okay. So my question is, this nucleates some dislocation like this. Those two, for example, I just take a family of dislocation, the green or the red or the blue. My question is, do they repel or do they attract? Attract. So why? So why do you think so? Opposite sign. This and this are opposite sign. No, they aren't. Why is it not like that? You can see it here on the movie, by the way. If they were attractive, but don't worry, don't be afraid. When I started this, I thought they would annihilate, and they don't. For sure, they don't, and it's normal. They should not, actually. And you can see that here, they don't annihilate. They come in vicinity, and they repel. they stop there. So the twin boundary, this is called a twin boundary, set of screw dislocation like that, is denser and denser with the stress. But it's not, if it was annihilating, then you will have a flux, a constant flux of dislocation, and no more, the density will not increase. Here you clearly see that the density increases with the torque, with the momentum. Okay? So there is no annihilation. So why is it so? Why? So I think Professor Rahman can help. This is a twist boundary. We were speaking about twist. So this is a torsion test. So we have sources, dislocation screw, which are emitted from the boundary like that, and they pile up at the center. And my question was, do they repel or do they attract? And a lot of them say they attract. Why I put CK? I don't know. Why do they attract? And stress is zero at center, that's true. So they are going slower and slower, that's true. But the two dislocations also, they have their own stress. Okay? So if they were attractive, then they should collapse. Even if there is no applied stress, there is the internal one. But here, it's clear that they don't do that. And if you do some geometry, so we have to do some geometry to be sure of that. You can make the loop. The source is here, so it's like if you had a virtual loop outside of your dislocation, okay? You can think that this has a Burgers vector that way, just to simplify. It's a screw, so it is parallel to the Burgers vector. This is the same dislocation, like this. If you push, you put a stress, which is, so let's put the stress is going down, like this, and if you put, let's say, an orientation of your line, so here you assume that when the stress is going down, this side is going left, okay? If here you have the same dislocation loop, okay, like this, we have the two possibilities. Either it's like that, so this is what this is what I suggest. So let's take what you suggested. If we take this is what you assume. You said that they should annihilate. So you suggested that you had this. If you had this, then the stress is now going up. My line is going back. The stress was going up. My line was going back. What did I say? The stress was going up, line back, back and up. So this is going left. Try to do it. It's more clear if you do it yourself. You see what I mean? If you reverse, how I should do that? Maybe we should do it with the cross product. If we have tau, which is like this, okay, the line which is opposite to tau goes to the right. Here the stress is from the right, so the stress is now here. The line opposite to tau, the stress is up, so it is reversed. But this is also reversed, so it should go the same way. So this guy will go here. Because you reverse both the line and the stress. So it will go the same way. So this is impossible. This is not the mechanism. So it cannot be this. It has to be the opposite. Actually, it's easy to say after that, but when you don't say, you put it in the code, and then, of course, it will go out, and you say, oh, mass, it's totally wrong, you see. So the reality is like that. So you have a loop, a virtual part and a real part, and the loop has to be the same side, because now this is up, this is up. So when the stress and the line are the same, so the stress and the line are the same, it is going on the right, this is going on the right. You see? Stress and line are the same orientation. It has to expand. Stress and line is the same. They have to expand. Okay? You get it? Anyway, you can try in your code, if you have a DD code, you can put these two loops, and you have a change of sign of the stress. So here tau is positive. That's the point. And here tau is negative. So you have a change of the shear stress. So because of that, you need to have the same loop in order to make this thing. So here at the beginning, at the middle, you have what we call a repulsive dipole, as we saw this morning, except this is made of screw. It's not an edge dipole. It's a pile-up. It's not a dipole. It's a pile-up. It's a pile-up of dislocations made of screw. So here you have two screws which pile-ups at the center. And as you said, at that place, the applied stress is equal to 0, because R is equal to 0. You don't have any stress, so they will stay there. They will just be pushed by the other. So this is what we see here. You have a denser and denser density of dislocation in the twist boundary, which accommodates this rotation. Okay? So this is just according to the torsion. So I think this you can see many times in TM. So this is a twist boundary. Twist boundary is always made at least of 2 screws. You don't need 3. Here I have 3 because it's FCC, because it's BCC, hexagonal. This is an hexagonal, so it's the C plane is here. So here you have 3 Burgers vectors. The in the basal plane. So the three Burgers vectors are here, but if I put only two, I am also able to accommodate a torsion. With two at least, you need to accommodate. So what I found, if I do that, you put your dislocation, you let them move, you see that your gamma, your strain you get out of this is increasing because there is a motion. By the way, we never said anything about the strain, because this will be the part of tomorrow. But do you know what is the strain out of a dislocation motion? When the dislocation is here of a length L, and if it moves, so it will sweep an area here, which is dA. Do you know what is the strain, shear strain out of it? The shear strain that dislocation generates when they sweep a given area is the length times the area. So it's B. This is the Burgers vector times the area, B dA. The area is this area here, over the volume. So this is the shear strain, BA over V. So here it means that when they move like this, they sweep some area, so the strain increase, like this. And when they stop to move, then of course there is no more increase of the strain. So there is a saturation. So it's not like in reality. In reality, the process is continuous and you have creep. So we should get always a gamma increasing. So this is not like that. Here, for a given momentum, we have a fixed amount of gamma. There is no gamma dot. Gamma dot equals 0. So we should think of something else. So if you have the basal slip system, if you apply a torsion, then there is no creep. Another slip system should be activated. So which slip system we do have in ice? It's an hexagonal structure. So either we'll have the first thing I should say is also, it was not done here, but here, since it's an hexagonal structure and you apply this torsion, the only slip system which is loaded is the basal plane. The prismatic plane has zero stress, the pyramidal has zero stress, so they are not activated. And anyway, in ice, those systems are very difficult to activate. They are mainly deforming in basal. So all the systems are, let's say, cannot move, so only basal can glide. And the other one has no applied stress. So now if we say, okay, something else happens, so we should still involve some other slip systems, but how could they be active? Either by climb or by cross-slip. Climb, people say that this doesn't exist in ice. We can believe them. I'm not sure it's true, but at least let's say okay. And also, here we only have screw dislocation. We saw that it's only screw which are generated, so climb for screw, it's not a big deal, it doesn't work. So now for screw, what is important is cross-slip. Yes, they can change. They are in the basal plane. Although there is no stress on the prismatic plane, they can cross-slip to the prismatic plane if needed, and then cross-slip back on the basal later on. So this is what we think. So the cross-slip could occur either to prismatic or pyramidal. You have two. When you have a basal plane here, you have two slip planes, the pyramidal and the prismatic, which share the same Burgers vectors. So those two are possible. And let's take, okay, the prismatic. Prismatic, some evidence of that occurs in topography, in X-ray topography at ISRF, at synchrotron. We were able to see some prismatic glide in ice. So this indeed is possible. So let's say, okay, prismatic is possible, although it is not loaded. The torsion does not apply. It's perpendicular to the plane, so usually there is no shear stress here. So it's not loaded. But it may happen just because of internal stress. If you look at the stress, so this is my dislocation, they are here, they are all there. So this is a view of this is the torsion specimen. This is the plane where the dislocation were located, and this is the twist boundary. And here I plotted the shear stress in this twist boundary, and you can see that this is the shear stress induced in the prismatic system. You can see that the dislocation here, exactly at that position, there is a zero stress. There is a change of sign. Here it's very high, and here it's very negative. So here it's plus, it's minus, and this is plus. So if your dislocation here, they do not want to cross-slip, but if they are a little bit above, then up, they will cross-slip a lot. If they are a little bit below, up, they will cross-slip a lot. Okay, so just because of this vicinity of the plane, just because of a few noise, you may have cross-slip induced by the internal stresses. Not by the load, but by internal stress. And it will occur like that. You will have basal. You go to prismatic like that. And of course, as soon as you are far enough in the prismatic plane, like here, for example, the stress field in the prismatic decreases a lot. It's close to 0 at that place, for example. So again, it will be pushed back to the basal, because at that place, the applied stress is still there. So it will cross-slip back. So actually, you have a small animation here, a PowerPoint animation. The screw is coming, up, cross-slip, and going. Okay, so this is what occurs. We have glide, cross-slip, and glide. Okay, and the good thing out of it is that when it is cross-slip here and cross-slipping back, this is like a Frank Read source. So here it will be able to make a new twist at that place typically. Okay, and the distance at which it will occur is just the ratio of the applied stress and internal stress. This gives you this distance here typically. Okay, so let's put that in the DD code. We just need to introduce the cross-slip probability. Now you know what is the cross-slip. Cross-slip probability to change from basal to prismatic.
But this internal stress is only from the other dislocation.
Only from DD, yes. Yes. Yeah, because the external load does not create any stress on the prismatic plane because it's perpendicular to the shear stress. The shear is like that, and the prismatic is like this. Okay. The normal to the plane is perpendicular. Okay? Yes? Not clear? What is not clear? Let me know. Okay, the prismatic plane is what I computed here. So this stress here is the shear stress in the prismatic plane due to the dislocation. In the prismatic, this is in the prismatic, yes, not in the basal, in the prismatic. So the basal plane is located here. This is my basal plane here, okay, containing my dislocations. And this is the shear stress induced by the dislocation in the prismatic plane. If I was plotting the shear stress due to the loading, it's 0 in the prismatic. So you have 0 plus this. And this is maximum here, close to the dislocation pileup, and minimum here, close to the dislocation pileup. So it's like something which is repelling very, very easily. My colleague from Grenoble said, like here you have, it's a pileup actually, it's like a pileup. In dislocation pileup, you have exactly the same thing. When you have a pileup of dislocations, the dislocations are stuck in their plane, like this, but the cross-slip stress, the stress to cross-slip, even in FCC, is very high locally at that place, and then decrease when you go far away from the pileup. So, and it can be negative or positive. It's like if you had your hand wet, you have wet hand like that, and you try to catch a soap, you have a soap, and then you press on it, this is the pileup stress, the pileup stress is bigger and bigger, so you press on your soap, and then the soap is coming away. It's exactly like this, the pileup of dislocation. You put your dislocation, you push them, and then suddenly they will cross-slip. Just because of the internal stress. Like with your soap and your hand, okay? Exactly this. You press, and then it goes away. Okay? So exactly this. And this is the stress. This is your hand are doing this thing. Okay? Do you get it now? Okay? So it's only due to internal stress. But now I need to define the code. We didn't have involved the cross-slip in ice up to now, so we had to do something for that, and this is what we do. This is the modeling of cross-slip typically. If you need to put cross-slip in DD, this is typically what I suggest. So this is what we put for the ice. So first, this is basal. By the way, it answers a question I had yesterday. Is it possible for hexagonal structure in basal plane to dissociate? The answer is yes. I forgot, but yes, indeed, we took that into account in that paper. So yes, in basal system, I think we may have some dissociation. I think you can confirm this for basal. I think it's impossible in prismatic, but I'm not sure on that. You know, Professor Sundararaman, if it's possible to dissociate dislocation in prismatic planes? I think no. I think it's just possible in basal. Anyway, this is what we assume at that stage here. So we assume that this is your screw dislocation. They are dissociated into partials, as we know. You need first to constrict your partials, as we did for FCC. And then you need to cross-slip in the prismatic plane. It's a perfect dislocation, so it's just pure line. And then it needs to dissociate again in the basal plane a little bit further, like that. So it's moving a big step above and expand. So the energy, the change of energy between this and this is the change of energy, can be computed as the two energy to build the two edge segments here. Here you have created two segments, so it has a cost. So this is the edge energy of the segments. Then this here is the stacking fault that you just need to create outside, upstairs there. And then here is the interaction stress between those two segments. Those two segments now, they are opposite signs, so they attract So they remove the energy. It's something that will remove the energy, this thing. Those two are attractive. So sometimes it is not favorable to create this, because if this is big enough, it will shrink, and it will not make this possible. This will be possible only if this is bigger than that. Okay? So that's the energy, and then of course we add the work we did to push the dislocation out of the plane. So this is the stress in the prismatic planes times the size of the work is applied. So tau b is the force, and xh is the length of your dislocation and the displacement. So this is the work, it's like the force times the length of motion. Okay? Do you catch the term here? It looks like a very bad equation, but it's very simple actually. You have a few terms which corresponds only to that picture. So at the end, it means that this relationship, you can see that it looks like something like this. It's the change of energy is, yes, because here we change also x of tau prime. So what did I do here? I don't remember what I did here. Anyway, yes, there was a few calculations that I didn't put here, because I think the x here, why is it depending on tau prime? I don't know. Why is it like that? I don't know what I put. It's too far away. I'm sorry, I forgot why I put that. Anyway, we have the energy. Forget about this formula. I will check if possible. But anyway, you have this energy, so we don't need to know how it is written. And then this is how we proceed. We say, okay, you have a dislocation in the basal slip system. Then we will compute two terms. Either the dislocation will stay in the basal, or it will cross-slip into prismatic. There is two probabilities. So we compute the P cross-slip and P primary like basal. So here it's just due to the activation energy of the basal system, and this due to the activation energy of the prismatic system. It is thermally activated, the two mechanisms. We assume that we are at very high temperature. And we compute now a cross-slip probability that will be the ratio between the cross-slip, so for the basal, divided by the summation of the two. So this is, I think there is a name for that. This is called, for the Monte Carlo guys, how do you call it for Monte Carlo? I think some people of you do Monte Carlo. This random stuff is called there is a name for this algorithm, but anyway, I don't remember. It's no, I forgot the name. Anyway, so this is how you compute the probability for cross-slip. From that, you take a number between 0 and 1 in the computer, random number, like this. If it's bigger than this probability, then you will glide in the basal. If it's lower than the probability, it means that if this is big, you will glide in the prismatic. Okay? And then your dislocation, it has glide in prismatic. You say that now it is again a basal dislocation. So you dissociate in the prismatic or in the basal again. So you move a bit, and then you say you are still a basal. And next step, it will check if it wants to move further or not. So this is what we put in the code. Okay? So it's very simple. Again, local rules. It's a local rule. It's not something that Didi could do by itself. And this is what it gives. So here I didn't put the movie because it was rotating every side. The student was doing some nasty thing with the 3D view. We would be all sick if you look at it. So this is just the pictures taken out of it. So here I put two sources just to be sure that the cross-slip starts. Because if I have a single one, it will be hard because it's exactly 0 in my plane. So I should either put a noise to trigger the cross-slip, or I put two planes. So this is two planes only with two Burgers vectors. You see that I don't put the three of them, only two, just to check if this works. And you see that they propagate, they reach the center, and before they reach when they reach the center, you already see some dark blue segments that you can zoom here. And those are the dislocation where they cross-slip, and you can see that they follow more or less the curvature, the profile we saw with the internal stress field in the prismatic system. Here it's longer than here, so here it's easier to move far away than there. And then when they move like this, they want to move back, and you can see that you generate new dislocation sources in several planes at a given distance like that will be able to multiply, and again to move further by cross-slip and so on. So you can, like this, invade your full specimen just by cross-slip mechanism. Although if you start by a single source, you may have dislocation everywhere, step by step, the planes by planes. They can invade the full specimen. And of course, this will create plasticity and creep for a given torsion. Now, you don't have a finite strain. You will have some strain that will always continuously increase with the time. Okay, you see the mechanism? Now, this is the axis is like that, okay? So this is, the torsion is like this. We apply a torsion test like this. See? Okay, so here is the torsion specimen. So this is rotated that way. Yes, you're right. He was rotating everything. So we are lost. But I told you it's the 3D view. I don't know why he was doing this. Okay, you get it now. So you have. If I was doing it here, maybe we can see. So it's coming toward the center, cross-slipping, and then you have new planes, and then cross-slipping, new plane, cross-slipping, new plane, and so on. Similarly to what we could have in FCC, except that here the cross-slip is at 90 degrees. There is not 60 degrees angle, it's a 90 degrees cross-slip. And just with the law we put, it's able to invade, to propagate plasticity plane by planes. So twist boundary by twist boundaries are forming due to this propagation mechanism. Of course, this not happens like here at a single place. This happens everywhere. Initially, you have sources at usually at the surface, because at the surface the stress is the maximum at the surface. And also you have some roughness usually, so you have some cracks, and this will induce some dislocations. So usually this starts at the surface at many places, and this will be the mechanism. So this is what we suggest, this is what we propose with the DD code, and this is what it gives. Without cross-slip, we had this saturation of the strain. With cross-slip, we indeed have something like that, and if we take the derivative, we found something very close to 2, changing the stress. So we were able, with that very simple mechanism, just testing a cross-slip probability law, to mimic the mechanical experimental behavior, which is a power law equal to 2 between the shear strain rate and the torsion stress. You see? So that's an example of high temperature deformation induced by cross-slip only. There is no climb here, this is only cross-slip, and you can see that this is enough to lead to creep. Okay? You have question on that? I think is this my slide? Yeah, it's my slide. It was my last on that. And then now we will move to superalloy. So maybe if you want to ask question now on ice, that's the good time to do it. Because now I will shift to superalloys, which is very different. It's okay? Yeah?
Do your results change depending on whether or not you allow dislocations to dissociate? If you did this with just perfect
They were actually in the code, they are perfect dislocation.
Oh, they are?
They are perfect. It's just in the model that I account for the fact that assuming that there is a constriction, this is an assumption, then the change of energy between that stage and that stage is this. But in my code, there are perfect lines. So it's a perfect line, and I would just put a probability.
But this we're using to calculate the probability of curve.
Yes, exactly. Only used for the probability, but I don't take into account all the partials and so on. I don't care of that because actually the size, I didn't say anything about that, but the specimen size is 10 centimeters by 5 centimeters. So just imagine the dissociation length, how small it is compared to that. So it's not our zoom on the DD code, okay? It was my largest scale dislocation dynamic simulation, actually. It was 5 centimeter grains in DD. Okay, this is very big. Okay, one more question on ice, or I go to superalloys.
But did you do it using Pneumodis or 3D?
This was 3D. Pneumodis was just started a few years ago. Pneumodis is a new code. As I told you, it's just to get rid of some problem we had, typically the glycine junction or things like that. So we wanted to start a new code. But up to now, and still today, I'm playing a lot with 3Ds because 3Ds is very easy. I can teach you in a week 3Ds. It's very easy and and I did so many work on 3Ds that I have a lot of features. I have a lot of tools, and it's something which is very fine, it can work very quickly. Pneumodis is a new one, so we need to create all the tools again and again, so it takes time. So Pneumodis, if you are interested and if you play with Pneumodis, it will increase the same way. But today it's just a small new code, I would say. So we don't have
How much time did it take?
to develop a code.
No, for this running this sort of simulation?
Running the simulation is one night, 2 nights, 2 days, 2 days.
2 centimeters.
Yeah, because the parameter size, everything was big because the time scale is big, so the time step also is big. That's the point. My time step was maybe 10 minus 3 seconds. You see, because everything it's a slow process, so everything is rescaled. You have to rescale everything in your code. Also, the Young modulus is very small. It's not ion, it's ice, so the Young modulus is a lot smaller. I don't remember how much it is, but maybe 3 or 4 gigapascal. So everything is different. So you have to rescale everything down to ice, and you will see that your time step is very big. So then you can go to real size experiments. Okay? So if you're interested, what I show you here, I didn't tell you, most of these studies were performed by my PhD students, and all the PDF of the PhD are available at NeuModis website. You have the PDF you can download. Some of them are in English, not all. This one was in French, by the way, but some of them are in English, and some were written by Indian students, by the way. Okay, so this was for torsion. You have more questions? No? Yes?
What made you take such a big sample? Because in this location dynamics we go for micron scale only.
Yeah.
So why you thought of taking such a macro scale sample?
Just because the time, as I told you, is very big. It takes weeks. The experiment took a month, typically. It took a month. In the computer, we simulate 1 day. So it's the same ratio, I would say, than what you are doing in your metallic experiments. You are simulating a part of the reality, but with the scale of ice. The ice is very slow process, so everything is big. The time step is big. Everything is big. The specimen size is big, just because it takes time to creep. That's the point. So it was natural to get it. It was naturally. I didn't have to go to the micron scale. Yeah, that's it. And also because there's 2 reasons. Because of that, and also because the torsion stress was low. It was a very small torsion stress. Because in reality, if I was applying a big torsion stress, the sample was broken very quickly. So if you want to add creep, you need to apply a very small torsion stress. So again, because of that, or thanks to that, I could have a very large time step. You see, it was just because of this application. I would not say that every time you simulate ice, you should use my parameters. It's just because here the conditions were so that you could use it. You see, it was very specific. It's the first time I was doing such a large scale simulation. But that's a good question because it's unusual. Yes, it's really unusual. Okay, let's go to superalloys for the remaining time. So superalloys. Superalloys, you know all what it is. It's made of gamma prime, so the cubic that you saw here. I already saw you some of the pictures in the previous slides where I tell you that the misfit stress is very important in the behavior, and I will show you that indeed it is very important. So here is the problematic. You assume that you have a nickel-based superalloys made of gamma prime, the cubic, dark cubic here, inside a gamma nickel matrix, which is the white thing here. And this is typically the size you are looking at, and you pull along a given directions. The direction of the single crystal, typically 001, which is for example, the turbine blade. This is the direction for which, because of the centrifuge force, you will have some tensile stress. So this is a lab test, and during the lab test, in literature you will find many times something very strange. When you look at the first time of the creep, you see that the creep rate, so this is the deformation, you can take the derivative of this if you want, the creep rate is negative at the beginning. So it means that first you deform, and then you don't deform. This is unusual. You see, you pull on it, and it is contracting. What's this? You pull on something, and it contracts. It's like a negative elastic moduli, you see. Elastically, it's impossible. You can do that with architectural materials, but not with continuum materials. You pull on it, and it's contracting. And you see clearly that here, you have contraction, and then you have this creep behavior that most of the studies you will find in literature focus on that stage, actually, which is something people do not care, because at that stage, the turbine blade is dead. 4% plastic deformation, it's unused. You cannot use it in a motor. You need to look at what happens here. And here you have this negative creep. So what is this negative creep? So that was the question we were asked with Jean-Loup Strudel. This is a study we just submitted the paper after 7 years working on that with Jean-Loup. We submitted last month. So, not last month, actually 2 weeks ago. I hope we will get the answer soon. So again, some evidence on that. Here again, you have this creep behavior, which is negative, and then coming up, and the normal one here. After some amount of, it's a 0.%, so it's a very small strain. Here, the same here. So this happens in many, these are different superalloys, different names. I'm not aware of all what they are. Jean-Loup could tell. I'm not an expert of superalloys, but those are different. They put different interstitials or different alloying components in the superalloys to make it more stable for the stacking fault or to change the misfit parameters. They play with that by adding some rheniums or this kind of thing. Anyway, and this you can see is for high temperature. And for low stress, the stress is not yet, the stress is given here. So the stress is quite low, and the temperature is quite high. So it's not in the high stress, low temperature regime. It's in the high stress, high temperature, low stress regime. Okay, this occurs, which is typically the in-service conditions for the blade. So we did, okay, let's have a look with DD simulations. So this is the same scheme as I showed you before. Remember, I told you that if you look at the channels between the gamma prime, do you remember this picture here, or do you want me to show again the 3D view? Everybody see what this means? This is just the channels between the gamma prime particles, which has been removed here for facilities. But the gamma prime should be here, there, and there. So it's a periodic cell, like that, so you make it periodic everywhere. And here I was looking at the shear stress on a given slip systems. Slip system is this one. So this is the Burgers vector, and this is the plane. I'm computing the shear stress on that slip system in this gamma prime. When I have this misfit, the misfit that we computed in the previous lectures, due to the fact that the gamma prime are smaller than the gamma, so it's shrinking the matrix, plus the tensile test. So here I apply 500 megapascal on that. So this is computed by finite element. We solve this using finite element coupling with the DD. And this gives this stress field. And you can see that the stress field is quite complicated. It's homogeneous more or less in the channels. You have some channels, which is the propagation channels, the cross channels, and the repulsive channels, which are totally different from my dislocations. And typically here, dislocation will be easy to move in the P channel. This is what I show you here with this scheme. You see my dislocation can go very easily in the P channel. It will be hard to move in the C channel, but it can go a bit. It's a cross channel. And for the ripple channel, because of the internal stress of this thing, it will be very hard to push inside. So again, in literature, you will see that many people say, oh, it's the same stress everywhere. Let's put dislocation in channels and see what happens. No, it doesn't work like that. Depending on the misfit stress, some channels are very easy to invade. Others could not be invaded. So that's something very important to take into account, the misfit stress. So you need to be sure that you have this in your code. At least for low stress, low applied stress, high temperature. If you apply a big stress, maybe you can neglect that effect. But for low stress, you cannot. Now if you look at the DD, so I put dislocation source, and I let them move in my DD code with this stress field. It's periodic, so this was my cell. I put many cells just to give a better view of what happens. But this is what I did was only this part. This is just replicas of the simulated volume. And you see that indeed some channels have been invaded, the P channels. Others are totally virgin of dislocation. There is no dislocation here. And one more feature is that you can see, typically this was my initial dislocation source. You can see that it cross-slip. You have many cross-slip like that. This is the cross-slip section. Dislocation is cross-slipping at the interface like that, you see. Dislocation cross-slips everywhere, which is similar to what was observed experimentally. If we look at the dislocation along the Burgers vector, if you look at that direction, here you can see the dislocation cross-slip planes. The Burgers now is on top of you. This is 101 direction. And you see that it is a set of cross-slip at the interface of the gamma prime. And finally, the dislocation wants to align with the 0, 0, 1, 0 direction. Because of the cross-slip, they want to be more or less vertical dislocation line. So finally, if you have a large probability of cross-slip, you would get some straight lines like that, just by cross-slipping. Okay? And now if you compute out of that some plastic and elastic deformation out of the DD, this is what it gives. Here is the deformation. So the deformation of this channel here along the z-axis. Let's take it here. So this is my z-axis, okay? And I will compute along the z-axis the component of plasticity due to that formula. So this is the plastic strain, I call it, B times the area divided by the volume. And the elastic strain, what is it? Is the fact that because of the dislocation fields, internal stress, you have some elastic fields that will change the shape of my volume. I can compute that with my finite element coupling. I can compute the change of shape due to the elastic fields of my dislocation inside the box. Does it shrink? Does it expand? What does it do? And this, if you do that, you get this. You see that the plastic strain due to dislocation is this one. is this amount of plastic strain, so it's positive, so it's along the tensile axis, that's normal, it's consistent. You push that way, you get plasticity in that direction. But the internal stress is bigger than the plastic stress. And this is elastic stress. Due to the dislocation motion, they move, they generate their own stress field, and this stress field is bigger than the deformation induced by this stress field is bigger than the plastic deformation that they generate. So because of that, globally, you have a contraction. This is done here. You have this plus this, which is negative. So finally, although you accommodate plasticity along the z direction, you have something which is happening in the code. The dislocation interact, and they generate a stress which is attractive and which is compressing the z-axis. So now we'll have a look to why is it like that? What is this origin? But you get the idea? Plasticity is okay, but elasticity is back, wants to shrink the horizontal channel.
So this is the straight field of the dislocations themselves.
Yes, only. Yeah. Dislocation themselves, only the DDD plastic part and elastic part.
And plastic you calculate from the movement of dislocation.
The plastic like that, yes. Yeah. So this is the area they swap, and then you compute the tensor, the full tensor out of it. I will show tomorrow the equation, but just this gives the component on NIBJ of the strain tensor, and this is what we plotted here, only the Z component, okay? So finally, you have the total deformation, which is negative, 0.1% compression, although you pull on it, okay? So you have, first you have this 0.153 here was what you applied initially in your box, because you push on it, so elastically your specimen deformed like this, and then it contracts like that because of the elastic fields due to dislocation. You get those four curves? Any question on that? So it's strange, right? You push, you pull on it, you have plastic deformation, that's correct, but you have elastic deformation that shrinks the specimen. So this is how it works. If you look at the stresses inside your dislocation dynamics, here I have removed the upper part of the gamma prime to visualize what happens, and I plotted sigma 11 along the x-axis, and sigma 33 along the z-axis. Initially, we guessed sigma 33 should be negative, so that you have this contraction. This is the guess. You say, okay, maybe because of your dislocation organization, you have a sigma 33 negative that will compress your specimen at the opposite direction from the loading. But the sigma 33 is not negative. It's totally zero. It's a stress field which is positive, negative. Its average is zero. So you don't have sigma 33. But what we got is a sigma 11, which is huge. You have a huge sigma 11, and the same for sigma 22. Sigma 11 and sigma 22 are totally the same. So it means that you have some tension stress here, tension stress there, and because of this tension, you have a shrinkage. It's just because of the Poisson effect. You are expanding a lot on 11 and 22, and this contract on ZZ, on 33. This is the origin of this contraction. Just because of the big stress along 11 and 22, that will shrink your specimen. It's not because of the 33 component. So this is something which was not obvious.
Still the stress field of the dislocation.
Only dislocation, yes. This is only dislocation stress field. I should write it. Coherent, but here the stress is so low that there will be no shear. There is no shear stress, so the dislocation will not be able to shear the particles. Just within the misfit, there is a misfit stress. Okay, so it's coherent because of that. So we have the misfit stress, we have the applied stress tensor, and then here what I plot is only the internal stress due to dislocations, and you can see that it is a pure tension. It's positive on 11 and 22. Okay, so it means that it's like that. When you have your misfit stress, you want to shrink the matrix, so you have something which is like that. The initial stage of your specimen is like this. When you apply the tension, you will compensate a bit here, you will elongate here, so your specimen is now like that. And when you move your dislocation, they will pile up here typically, less there, but a lot here because of the P channel, which is very much different from the R and the C channels. They will pile up here a lot. They will create a kind of what people call interfacial dislocation network, EDN. Interfacial dislocation network here. And this dislocation network, it generates a stress, which is a big tension stress on this direction, like that, and a few on that one. So this expands like that and constrict the full specimen. So this was the origin of this negative creep, which was controversial for years, actually. Since the 60s, it was observed, and nobody knew why it was like this. And this is another thing that I finally did. I can say, okay, now this was my DD code, my stupid 3D code, so I don't have the nodes, I'm not able to do climb easily, so I don't do it with climb. So I say, what happens next when the dislocation at the interface will be exactly rectilinear, like that, along the 100 direction. So I put a network of dislocations so that they exactly accommodate the misfit. When you put these dislocations with the Burgers vector, you know there is the Brooks, you know the Brooks law? Have you heard about Brooks formula? Which says that if you have a lattice mismatch between two phases, you could put some dislocation like that at the interface with a Burgers vector, so that this will compensate the mismatch. So you can compute the distance at which you put the dislocations in order to compensate the mismatch. And you say D is equal to B, H, how is it? Is H is equal to B over delta. I think something like that. And you have H, B over delta. Yeah. Okay. So you put so many dislocations in order to accommodate your mismatch, your misfit strain, so that you have no more misfit between the two. So this is what we did here. I put as many dislocations as needed to compensate exactly the misfit, and I compute in that, as you say, ideal network. This is not dynamic; it's just a static study. I compute the stress tensors. So this is again sigma free. Sigma 8 is the 8 component of the tensor. So this is sigma free. Is 0, plus or minus 0. You can see my two networks. And here's the sigma 1. Sigma 0 is the first component. And you can see that it is very much compressive, not compressive, tension everywhere. So you have this expansion. It's due to this interfacial dislocation network. Okay, so this also is given by this ideal network. Okay, so you get the idea. Just because you are pulling a lot in the horizontal channels, then you are shrinking your specimen, and this in some cases could be bigger than the plastic at that stage. So this was the conclusion for this for the two studies, I would say. Dislocation, this was for superalloys. Superalloys, they organize in one OO misfit network if the cross-slip is unable. So you need to have the cross-slip to get this, okay? And then the elastic stress was predominant compared to the plastic, this plastic part, and this was explained negative creep by the fact that the 101 channels are in 2D plane strain, they are more expanded and zero stress on the z-axis. This was the origin of the negative stress, okay? So I think I will stop it here. I don't know if I'm in time or not, but this is where I will stop. But I'm happy to answer your question if you have any regarding those two studies, so ice, torsion, and tensile creep in superalloys. So you see that DD can help. This I showed you also that you should believe in DD. You get some results out of it if you find. And the funny thing is that you can look in literature in DD. I think there exists something like 20 papers, and everybody is looking at the process of shearing the gamma prime. We don't care of that. If you shear the gamma prime, everything is dead. You are too far in the deformation range. The deformation is too big. So you should focus on what is interesting for the company, for the industry. And I think this is typically what people are looking for. Any question? No? Who is working on superalloys? I know that somebody was told me. So you don't have any question? This one has no climb, yes, because no, this one has no climb. If I had put climb, then I would have these straight lines. Initially, I have this zigzag dislocation. If I add climb, then they will straighten into the 001 dislocation lines. So this is what I put as an ideal dislocation network. But recently, I had a student working with a colleague of mine who did climb and cross-slip with a high stress. So again, she was looking at shearing the particles. You see? Even my students are looking at that. And, but it was working. I can show you the reference if you're interested. The name is Siwen Gao. She was working in Germany. Where there is a misfit? Maybe where there is a misfit between gamma and gamma prime. The misfit is just because of the precipitation. It's a coherent precipitation. Yeah.
So the lattice it's a different composition. It's a different phase.
Yeah, and depending, and the funny thing is that depending on what they put for precipitating, it's nickel aluminum, right? So with aluminum in nickel, depending on the element they put, you can have a negative misfit, which is main of the blade, and you can have also positive if you want. This exists also. There are some specimens with positive misfit. So you can have all the range you want, just playing with it's just like magician, you see, they put things and it works. They have some new materials. But you can have maybe 10 or 20 different superalloys with all what you want. They change the stacking fault energy, they change the misfit strength. All these are parameters they investigated for years for the aeronautic companies. Yes?
Apart from discrete, is it possible to incorporate the elastic inhomogeneity also, like gamma prime is having different models?
Yeah. It is, because I showed you in my previous slide that we did it for the spherical particles. The thing is that this is time consuming. I will show you numerically how we do that. It's very heavy. It's very heavy to handle. So here I assume that it was the same elastic moduli. Yeah. But indeed it's possible. It's just hard it's not hard, it takes time. This simulation took something like, I think 2 days, 1 or 2 days, it's very short. If you put this, it will take a week. So it's not funny to wait a week. But it works. I will explain how to do that. It's just more time consuming, yes.
So when you put the modulus dispatch, are you calculating something like an image stress of the
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yes, because of because this was what I explained in two lectures from now. We explained this morning, when you have the dislocation close to a rigid particles, you have some image forces. And to compute that, you need to compute force everywhere inside your particles as an eigenstrain. This is what we call an eigenstrain that you solve by FEM, and this gives the stress back to your dislocation. So to compute your stress field to any point, gauge point of your particle mesh, takes a lot of time. It's like if you add in your simulation something like 10,000 nodes, 10,000 dislocation, all the gauge points has to be computed. So it slows down everything. That's it. But except this thing, it's possible, yes. But here I didn't do it. Although I was using isotropy. And we know that nickel is not isotropic. And so here it was an assumption, it was isotropic elasticity. But, okay. Okay, so if you're happy, we can stop here and see you tomorrow.